In a Louisiana swamp, a killer hunted women who trusted the wrong people. In a New Mexico desert, someone buried 11 souls and walked away. And in a Texas church, security cameras captured a murderer in police gear. But we still don't know who's behind the mask. Right now across America, there are over 250,000 unsolved murder cases sitting in police files. That's 250,000 families who've never gotten answers. 250,000 killers who've never faced justice. But some cases cut deeper than others. Some cases expose the darkest corners of our society, where the very people meant to serve and protect become suspect, where entire communities lose faith in justice itself. What if the people meant to protect you were the ones you needed protection from? What if your local sheriff's department had secrets worth killing for? What if the person walking past you on the street had 11 bodies buried in the desert, and no one would ever know? These aren't just cold cases gathering dust in filing cabinets. These are active wounds in American communities, cases that reveal how easily killers can exploit the most vulnerable among us. They show us how corruption, incompetence, and societal blindness create the perfect conditions for monsters to thrive. The victims in today's cases weren't random targets. They were chosen specifically because their lives were deemed expendable by both their killers and, tragically, by the system that should have protected them. Over the next few minutes, you're going to discover disturbing patterns that connect these 5 cases, patterns that reveal why they remain unsolved decades later. You'll see how a killer's choice of victim can determine whether justice is served. You'll learn why some murders get solved in days while others haunt communities for generations. But here's what makes these cases truly terrifying. Each one could happen in your town, to people you know, and the same failures that allowed these killers to escape justice could happen again tomorrow. If you're ready to dive deep into America's most haunting, unsolved mysteries, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Every week we explore cases that law enforcement wants you to forget, but that victims' families refuse to let die. Because sometimes the only thing standing between a killer and freedom is people like you who refuse to stop asking questions. Let's begin with a story from Louisiana, where 8 women trusted the wrong people with their lives. The Jeff Davis 8, a shadow over the bayou. Jefferson Davis Parish, Louisiana. A place where Spanish moss drapes ancient cypress trees like funeral shrouds, where murky bayou waters hide secrets that never surface. Between 2005 and 2009, this remote corner of Louisiana became a hunting ground for a predator who understood exactly how to choose victims that society would overlook. The timeline tells a horrific story. May 2005, Loretta Lewis, 28, found in a canal. September 2005, Ernestine Patterson, 30, discovered in another waterway, her throat slashed. The deaths continued with methodical precision. Kristen Gary Lopez, 21st, Whitney Dubois, 26th. Laconia Muggy Brown, 23rd, another throat slashing. Crystal Zeno, 24. Brittany Gary, 17, Kristen's cousin. Finally, Nicole Guillory, 26, in 2009. 8 women, all from the small town of Jennings, population barely 10,000, all found in remote canals and waterways that snake through the Louisiana wilderness like veins of death. But these weren't random victims. The Jeff Davis 8 shared a tragic profile that made them perfect targets for someone who understood the system's blind spots. They lived on society's margins, struggling with poverty, battling addiction, working in the underground economy of drugs and sex work. Mental health issues plagued several of them. They were the kind of women whose disappearances wouldn't trigger massive search efforts or media attention. Yet there was another connection, one far more sinister than their shared vulnerabilities. Most of these women served as confidential informants for the Jefferson Davis Parish Sheriff's Office. They fed information about the local drug trade to law enforcement, walking the dangerous line between survival and betrayal in a world where snitching could get you killed. This revelation transforms the entire case. These women weren't just victims of a serial killer. They were potentially silenced by someone who knew about their cooperation with police, someone who had access to information about their activities, someone who could move freely through their world without raising suspicion. The official investigation launched with promises of justice. A multi-agency task force formed, pursuing the theory of a serial killer stalking the bayou. But from the beginning, something felt wrong to the families and community members who knew these women best. Witnesses began coming forward with disturbing accounts. One reported seeing a detective's truck connected to a victim on the day she vanished. The detective was never properly questioned. Evidence started disappearing or being mishandled in ways that seemed almost deliberate. Key pieces of physical evidence that could have provided DNA or other forensic links simply vanished from the chain of custody. The most damning allegations came from inside the system itself. Inmates at the local jail provided statements to a sergeant, claiming they had direct knowledge of law enforcement involvement in covering up at least one murder. These weren't vague accusations. They were specific, detailed accounts that named names and described methods. But instead of triggering a deeper investigation, these revelations led to the sergeant who took the statements being forced from his job. The inmate testimonies were buried, dismissed, forgotten. The message was clear. Some questions were too dangerous to ask. Local suspects emerged and disappeared just as quickly. A strip club owner who admitted knowing most of the victims was questioned but never charged, despite his connections to their world. Other persons of interest were interviewed and released without explanation. Each potential lead seemed to hit a wall of official indifference or active obstruction. The families of the Jeff Davis 8 found themselves fighting not just for justice, but for basic acknowledgement that their loved ones' lives mattered. They organized, protested, demanded answers. They hired private investigators and pushed for federal intervention. But the case remained stalled, trapped in a web of local politics and potential corruption that seemed designed to prevent the truth from emerging. What makes this case particularly dark isn't just the brutality of the murders. At least 2 victims had their throats cut, while others showed signs of asphyxiation before their bodies decomposed beyond determining exact cause of death. It's the systematic failure of every institution that should have protected these women. The sheriff's office that used them as informants couldn't or wouldn't solve their murders. The task force created to find their killer seemed more interested in managing public perception than finding truth. The media largely ignored their deaths until years later, when the pattern became impossible to dismiss. Today, the Jeff Davis 8 case remains officially unsolved. No arrests have been made. No charges have been filed. The killer or killers walk free, protected by a wall of silence that has held firm for nearly 2 decades. But this was just the beginning of a much darker pattern we'll explore today. A pattern that reveals how easily killers can exploit not just individual vulnerabilities, but systemic failures that turn law enforcement from protector to potential predator. The Louisiana bayou keeps its secrets well, but across the country in the high desert of New Mexico, another killer was busy creating a mass grave that would dwarf even the Jeff Davis 8 in its scope and horror. A killer who understood that in America, some victims matter less than others, and that understanding can buy you years of freedom, even when you're burying bodies by the dozen. The West Mesa Bone Collector, a mass grave in the desert. February 2, 2009. Christine Ross was walking her dog on the barren West Mesa of Albuquerque, New Mexico, when her pet began digging frantically in the sandy soil. What the dog unearthed would expose one of the most prolific serial killing sprees in American history and reveal a predator who operated with terrifying efficiency for years. The bone Christine's dog found was human, a femur, bleached white by the desert sun. But this wasn't an isolated discovery. As investigators began excavating the 92-acre area, a former construction site on the city's outskirts, they realized they were standing on top of a carefully organized cemetery of murder. The horror unfolded methodically. 11 women, 1 unborn child, all buried in shallow graves across the windswept mesa, their remains scattered by time, weather, and scavenging animals. The killer had chosen his dumping ground with calculated precision, remote enough to avoid detection, yet accessible enough for repeated visits over several years. The timeline painted a picture of sustained predation. The victims had disappeared between 2003 and 2005, vanishing from Albuquerque's streets during a 2-year window when a monster walked among them. Monica Candelaria, 22, Victoria Chavez, 26, Doreen Marcus, 28, Veronica Romero, 28, Jamie Barella, 20, Evelyn Salazar, 36, Selania Edwards, 15, just a teenager, Cinnamon Elks, 32, Julie Nieto, 24, Virginia Cloven, 24, and Michelle Valdez, 22, who was 5 months pregnant when she died. These women shared the same tragic profile we saw in Louisiana. They lived on society's margins, struggling with addiction, involved in sex work, moving through a world that most people preferred to ignore. They were young, mostly Hispanic, economically disadvantaged, the kind of victims whose disappearances don't trigger Amber Alerts or massive search efforts. But unlike the Jeff Davis 8, these women weren't connected to law enforcement as informants. Their vulnerability came from different sources: poverty, addiction, dangerous lifestyles that put them in contact with predators. They were easy targets for someone who understood that their deaths wouldn't generate the same public outcry as victims from different backgrounds. The investigation faced immediate challenges. Skeletal remains provide limited forensic evidence compared to fresh crime scenes. Years of exposure had eliminated most DNA evidence. The victims' high-risk lifestyles made reconstructing their final days nearly impossible. They moved through a shadow world of drugs, prostitution, and violence where witnesses were scarce and memories unreliable. Two primary suspects emerged from the investigation, both fitting the profile of someone capable of such sustained violence. Lorenzo Montoya lived near the burial site and had a history of violence against women. In 2006, he was killed by police after strangling another woman, and notably, the disappearances stopped after his death. This timing wasn't coincidental. It suggested the bone collector's killing spree had ended with Montoya's death. The second suspect, Joseph Blee, was a convicted serial rapist who specifically targeted sex workers in the Albuquerque area. His methods and victim preferences aligned perfectly with the bone collector's pattern. But like Montoya, no direct physical evidence linked him to the West Mesa murders. The case stalled in the gap between suspicion and proof. Both suspects were dead or imprisoned, but neither could be definitively connected to the crimes. DNA evidence was too degraded. Witness testimony was unreliable or non-existent. The killer had chosen his victims and disposal method too well. What makes the West Mesa case particularly disturbing isn't just its scale. 11 victims make it one of the largest serial killer burial sites ever discovered in the United States. It's what the case reveals about how society values different lives. These women disappeared over 2 years, but their absences barely registered. No massive search efforts, no media attention, no public outcry. They were written off as runaways, addicts who'd moved on, sex workers who'd found new territories. Their families' pleas for help were largely ignored by both law enforcement and media. The killer understood this societal blindness and exploited it ruthlessly. He knew he could hunt these women without triggering the kind of investigation that would threaten his freedom. He was right. For years, he operated with virtual impunity, building his desert cemetery one victim at a time. Even after the discovery, the case struggled for attention. 11 murdered women should have been front-page news nationwide. Instead, it remained largely a regional story, another example of how victim selection determines public interest. The families of these women continue fighting for justice and recognition. They've organized, advocated, and refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. But the bone collector remains unidentified, his crimes officially unsolved despite strong suspicions about his identity. Have you noticed similar cases in your community? Crimes that don't get the attention they deserve because of who the victims were? Drop a comment and let us know. These patterns exist everywhere, and recognizing them is the first step toward changing them. The West Mesa Bone Collector created a mass grave in the desert, exploiting society's willingness to overlook certain victims. But our next case shows how, even when a killer is caught on camera, even when the crime happens in broad daylight in a place of worship, justice can still remain elusive. Sometimes the most documented murders are the hardest to solve. The murder of Missy Bevers, a killer in tactical gear. April 18, 2016, 4:18 a.m. Terry Missy Bevers pulled into the parking lot of Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas, just like she had dozens of times before. The 45-year-old fitness instructor was preparing for her early morning Camp Gladiator workout class arriving early to set up equipment and unlock the building for her students. It was a routine that had become second nature. Arrive before dawn, prepare the space, greet her dedicated fitness enthusiasts who showed up rain or shine. But this Monday morning would shatter that routine forever. By 5 a.m., when her first students arrived, Missy Bevers was dead, her body discovered inside the church, victim of a brutal attack that defied explanation. The crime scene told a story of shocking violence. Multiple puncture wounds to her head and chest had ended her life. But what made this case extraordinary wasn't just the brutality, it was what the church's security cameras had captured in the hours before her arrival. The footage is haunting in its mundane horror. At 3:50 a.m., nearly 30 minutes before Missy arrived, an unknown figure appears on the surveillance system. They're dressed head to toe in police tactical gear, dark clothing, a tactical vest emblazoned with police, a helmet that completely obscures their face. The disguise is so complete that investigators still can't determine the suspect's gender, age, or race. But it's not just the costume that makes the footage so unsettling, it's the behavior. The figure moves through the church hallways with casual confidence, breaking glass doors, prying open cabinets, wandering from room to room. There's no urgency, no apparent fear of discovery. They move like someone who belongs there, someone comfortable in their surroundings. The suspect's gait has become one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in modern true crime. They walk with a distinctive, almost shuffling movement. Some experts describe it as feminine, others see masculine characteristics. The stride appears deliberate yet awkward, possibly indicating an injury, a disguise technique, or simply the natural walk of someone wearing unfamiliar tactical gear. Initially, investigators theorized this was a burglary gone wrong. The suspect appeared to be searching through the church, breaking into offices and storage areas. But that theory crumbled under scrutiny. Nothing of value was taken. The attack on Missy was focused and brutal, suggesting she was the intended target from the beginning. The investigation revealed layers of complexity in Missy's life that opened multiple avenues of inquiry. She had received creepy messages on LinkedIn from unknown individuals. Her marriage was experiencing strain. Both she and her husband had been having affairs, creating a web of potential motives and suspects. Search warrants executed on the Bevers family revealed the extent of the marital problems. Text messages showed tensions, accusations, and emotional turmoil, but alibis quickly eliminated the most obvious suspects. Missy's husband was out of town on a fishing trip with solid documentation. Her father-in-law initially considered a person of interest due to his similar gait and access to police equipment, also had an ironclad alibi. The investigation expanded to examine a suspicious vehicle, a light-colored Nissan Altima spotted in a nearby parking lot around the time of the murder. Security footage showed the car arriving and leaving during the crucial time frame. But despite extensive efforts, investigators never identified the driver or connected the vehicle to any suspect. Digital forensics revealed Missy's phone activity in her final hours. She had been active on social media, posting about the upcoming workout class despite the rainy weather. Her last Facebook post, encouraging people to attend despite the conditions, now reads like a tragic invitation to her own murder. The killer was methodical, but they made one mistake that continues to haunt this case. They allowed themselves to be filmed. Yet even with clear video evidence of their presence at the crime scene, even with their distinctive walk captured from multiple angles, the footage has failed to produce an identification. Experts have analyzed every frame, measuring stride length, studying body mechanics, comparing the suspect's movements to potential persons of interest. Amateur sleuths have created detailed breakdowns, overlaying the footage with walking patterns of various suspects. But the tactical gear serves its purpose too well. It renders the wearer anonymous, a ghost in police clothing. The case has generated thousands of tips and dozens of potential suspects, but none have yielded charges. The combination of the complete disguise and the lack of forensic evidence at the scene has created an investigative dead end that persists 8 years later. What makes Missy Bevers' murder particularly disturbing is how documented yet unsolvable it remains. We can watch her killer moving through the church. We can see their distinctive walk, their methodical search, their casual confidence. but we cannot identify them. The footage represents a new kind of modern horror, the documented mystery. In an age where cameras are everywhere, where digital footprints seem impossible to erase, here's a killer who committed murder on camera and simply vanished into the darkness. The tactical gear wasn't just a disguise, it was a statement. Someone wanted to look like law enforcement while committing murder in a house of worship. The symbolism is as disturbing as the crime itself. From a killer captured on camera but never identified, we move to our next case, one where the victim was captured on camera in her final moments, creating footage so disturbing it launched 1,000 theories and still haunts viewers today. The unexplained death of Elisa Lam, mystery at the Cecil Hotel. The Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles carries a reputation that precedes it like a curse. Built in 1924, this 14-story structure has witnessed more death and darkness than most morgues. Serial killers have called it home. Suicides have claimed dozens of lives within its walls. The hotel's history reads like a catalog of human misery, making it the perfect backdrop for one of the most baffling mysteries of the 21st century. In January 2013, 21-year-old Elisa Lam checked into the Cecil during a solo trip from her home in Vancouver, Canada. The University of British Columbia student was traveling down the West Coast, documenting her journey through social media posts and blog entries. She was supposed to check out on January 31st and continue to Santa Cruz. She never made it. When Elisa failed to return home, her family contacted the LAPD. The search began routinely: missing person flyers, interviews with hotel staff, examination of her room. But the case took a bizarre turn when investigators released the last known footage of Elisa alive, captured by the hotel's elevator security camera on January 31st. The video defies easy explanation. Elisa enters the elevator alone, pressing multiple floor buttons. But instead of the doors closing, she begins exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. She steps to the corner of the elevator, pressing herself against the wall as if hiding from someone in the hallway. She peers out cautiously, looking left and right like she's checking for danger. Then her behavior escalates. She steps partially out of the elevator, gesticulating wildly with her hands, appearing to have an animated conversation with someone just outside the camera's view. Her movements become more frantic, more desperate. She waves her arms, makes strange hand gestures, and appears to be speaking or arguing with an invisible presence. Throughout this 4-minute ordeal, the elevator doors remain open, a malfunction that has never been adequately explained. Normally, the doors would close automatically after a few seconds, but they stay open during Elisa's entire bizarre performance, as if the elevator itself is complicit in whatever is happening. Finally, Elisa steps out of the elevator and disappears from view. The doors close. She is never seen alive again. For 19 days, the search continued. Hotel guests began complaining about problems with the water, low pressure, discoloration, and a strange taste that made it undrinkable. Maintenance workers were sent to investigate the rooftop water tanks, and what they found there would transform this missing person case into an international mystery. Elisa's naked body was floating in one of the 4 large water tanks that supplied the hotel's water system. She had been dead for weeks, her body decomposing in the water that guests had been drinking, bathing in, and brushing their teeth with. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. How did Elisa access the roof? The hotel maintained that rooftop access was restricted, requiring either a key or triggering an alarm system. Security footage showed no evidence of her reaching the roof, yet somehow she had gotten there. How did she enter the water tank? The cylindrical tank stood 10 feet tall with heavy lids that required significant effort to open. Even if she could climb up and open the lid, how did it close behind her? The tanks were designed to seal tightly. It would be nearly impossible for someone inside to close the lid from within. The official autopsy ruled her death an accidental drowning, with her bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. Toxicology reports showed her prescription medications in her system, but no illegal drugs or alcohol. There were no signs of physical trauma or sexual assault. But this official explanation satisfied almost no one. The public rejected the accidental drowning theory, pointing to the impossibility of the logistics. How does someone accidentally climb into a sealed water tank on a restricted roof? The elevator video seemed to show someone in distress, possibly fleeing from a threat. Theories proliferated wildly. Some suggested Elisa was experiencing a psychotic episode, explaining her erratic behavior and poor decision-making. Others believed she was being pursued by someone who doesn't appear in the elevator footage, someone who forced her onto the roof and into the tank. The case became an internet phenomenon, spawning countless amateur investigations, conspiracy theories, and documentary films. The elevator footage was analyzed frame by frame, with viewers claiming to see evidence of digital manipulation or hidden figures. What makes Elisa Lam's case so deeply disturbing isn't just the mystery of how she died. It's the psychological horror of watching someone's final moments without understanding what they're experiencing. The elevator video captures pure terror and confusion, but we can't see what's causing it. The footage taps into primal fears about mental illness, about being alone and vulnerable in a dangerous place, about the thin line between reality and delusion. Watching Elisa's frantic gestures and fearful glances, viewers project their own fears onto her experience. The Cecil Hotel's dark history amplifies the horror. This isn't just any hotel. It's a place where nightmares come true, where the vulnerable become victims. Elisa's death fits the pattern while defying explanation. What's your theory about what happened to Elisa Lam? Was it a tragic accident during a mental health crisis? Or was something more sinister at play? Share your thoughts in the comments. This case has puzzled investigators and amateur sleuths for over a decade. From the psychological mystery of Elisa Lam, we turn to our final case, one where the motive seemed clear, the suspect was identified, but justice remained elusive in the violent world of hip-hop, where street justice often replaces legal justice. The murder of Mac DeReafre, a hip-hop legend, silenced. Andre Louis Hicks didn't just make music, he created a movement. Known professionally as Mac Dre, the Bay Area rapper was the architect of the hyphy movement, a high-energy style of hip-hop that defined Northern California's sound in the early 2000s. His influence extended far beyond record sales. He was a cultural force who gave voice to Oakland's streets, transforming local slang into nationwide phenomena and inspiring an entire generation of West Coast artists. Mac Dre's career was built on authenticity earned through hardship. His early years were marked by legal troubles, including a conspiracy conviction that sent him to federal prison for 5 years. But even incarceration couldn't silence his creativity. He continued writing, recording, and building his legend from behind bars. When he was released, he returned to music with renewed focus, founding Thiz Entertainment and becoming the undisputed king of the Bay Area rap scene. By 2004, Mac Dre was at the peak of his powers. His album, Ronald Reagan Dregonomics, had elevated his status beyond regional celebrity. He was touring nationally, spreading the hyphy movement across the country and collaborating with major artists. At 34, he had survived the streets, the prison system, and the music industry's pitfalls. He seemed poised for mainstream breakthrough. November 1st, 2004. Mac Dre was in Kansas City, Missouri, following a performance at a local venue. The show had gone well and he was riding in a white van on Highway 71 with members of his crew heading back to their hotel. It was after 2 a.m. and the interstate was nearly empty. A stolen Buick Park Avenue pulled alongside the van. Without warning, gunfire erupted from the vehicle. Bullets shattered the van's windows, striking Mac Dre multiple times. The van careened off the highway and crashed. When paramedics arrived, Andre Hicks was dead, his promising life cut short by an assassin's bullets on a dark Missouri highway. The murder investigation quickly focused on a financial dispute theory. Mac Dre had allegedly been shortchanged on his performance fee, creating tension with local promoters. In the hip-hop world, such disputes can escalate rapidly from business disagreements to deadly conflicts. But proving this theory required identifying who pulled the trigger. The prime suspect emerged from Kansas City's own rap scene. Anthony Fat Tone Watkins was a local rapper with connections to the city's underground. Multiple sources suggested he was involved in Mac Dre's murder, but evidence remained elusive. Fat Tone didn't just deny involvement. He seemed to taunt Mac Dre's supporters, making public statements that many interpreted as boasting about the killing. The situation escalated when Fat Tone began targeting other Bay Area artists with verbal attacks, seemingly daring them to retaliate. His behavior suggested either incredible stupidity or brazen confidence that he was untouchable. He appeared on radio shows making inflammatory comments about McDre and his associates, behavior that would prove fatal. The hip-hop community doesn't always wait for legal justice. In May 2005, 6 months after McDre's death, Fat Tone was gunned down outside a Las Vegas recording studio. The retaliation was swift and definitive. Andre McMinister Dow, a Bay Area promoter and rapper, was eventually convicted of orchestrating Fat Tone's murder. But Fat Tone's death created as many problems as it solved. While many in the hip-hop community saw it as justified payback, it also eliminated the main suspect in McDre's case. Dead men can't be prosecuted, can't provide testimony, can't lead investigators to accomplices or evidence. Fat Tone took whatever knowledge he had about McDre's murder to his grave. The cycle of violence didn't end there. McMinister's conviction for Fat Tone's murder created new grievances, new calls for vengeance. What started as one unsolved murder had spawned multiple killings, each feeding the next in an endless loop of street justice. This pattern reveals something disturbing about how justice works in certain communities. When legal systems fail to provide satisfaction, people create their own. The problem is that street justice never ends. It just creates new victims and new reasons for revenge. McDre's murder officially remains unsolved. No one has been charged with his killing. The Kansas City police investigation stalled without concrete evidence, and Fat Tone's subsequent death closed off the most promising lead. 2 decades later, the case sits in a file cabinet, another unsolved homicide in a system overwhelmed by violence. But the cultural impact of McDre's death extends far beyond the legal system's failure. His murder represented a turning point for the hyphy movement and Bay Area hip-hop generally. The loss of their leading voice left a void that was never fully filled. The movement he created continued, but without its architect, it lacked the authentic street credibility and creative vision that McDre provided. His death also highlighted the dangerous intersection of hip-hop culture and street violence. McDre had survived prison, built a legitimate business, and was achieving mainstream success. Yet the street still claimed him, proving that success doesn't always provide protection from the violence that plagues urban communities. Today, McDre is remembered as a martyr and a legend. His influence still felt in every Bay Area artist who carries the hyphy torch. But his unsolved murder serves as a reminder of how easily talent can be extinguished, and how the cycles of violence that claim so many young lives often begin with cases that never see justice. 5 cases, 5 different killers, 5 failures of justice. But beneath their unique horrors, these mysteries share disturbing common threads that reveal uncomfortable truths about American society and law enforcement. First, victim selection matters. The Jeff Davis 8 and West Mesa Bone Collector cases show how killers exploit society's blind spots, targeting women whose lives are deemed less valuable. When victims are poor, addicted, or involved in sex work, investigations receive fewer resources, less media attention, and minimal public pressure for resolution. These killers understood that choosing marginalized victims bought them time and freedom. Second, institutional failure enables murderers. In Louisiana, potential police corruption buried evidence and silenced witnesses. In New Mexico, systemic indifference allowed a killer to operate for years. Even when evidence exists, like Missy Bevers' surveillance footage, bureaucratic limitations can prevent identification and arrest. Third, modern technology creates new mysteries alongside new solutions. Elisa Lam's elevator video and Missy Bevers' surveillance footage provide unprecedented documentation of victims' final moments. Yet both cases remain unsolved. Having evidence doesn't guarantee answers. These cases teach us that justice isn't blind, it's selective. It sees wealth, race, and social status before it sees victims. It responds to public pressure and media attention more than legal obligation, and it often fails the people who need it most. But there's reason for hope. DNA technology continues advancing, with genetic genealogy solving decades-old cases that seemed hopeless. Cold case units are reopening files with fresh eyes and new tools. Digital forensics can extract evidence from devices that didn't exist when these crimes occurred. The families of these victims refuse to let their stories die. They organize, advocate, and keep pressure on investigators. They understand that public attention can reignite stalled investigations and generate new leads. Social media has democratized crime solving, connecting amateur sleuths with professional investigators. Online communities analyze evidence, share theories, and sometimes provide the missing piece that breaks a case wide open. If these stories moved you, if they made you think about justice and vulnerability in new ways, hit that like button and subscribe for daily deep dives into America's most haunting mysteries. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode, because these cases need witnesses, and witnesses create pressure for answers. Share this video with someone who needs to hear these stories. Comment about similar cases in your community. Your engagement keeps these mysteries alive in public consciousness, and that attention can make the difference between forgotten files and solved cases. These 5 cases remain unsolved, but they're not forgotten. And sometimes that's all it takes for justice to finally find its way home.